When you think about it, our bodies go through these absolutely wild transformations. We shoot up in height, we go through puberty, some of us even create new life. And none of this is by accident. It's all part of this incredibly precise, perfectly timed plan. So what's the deal? Who's the secret conductor leading this whole biological symphony? What's pulling the strings behind all these massive changes? Well, that is exactly what we are going to get into. All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll meet the body's master regulator. Then we'll get to know the key players, the glands, hormones, and receptors. We'll see them in action, bust a few myths, and wrap up by looking at what happens when things get out of balance. So, the answer? It's something called the endocrine system. And you can think of it as this hidden network working behind the scenes 24/7 to direct all these huge changes. But its job is so much bigger than just growth spurts and puberty. I mean, this system is the ultimate multitasker. Seriously. It's not just orchestrating your growth or managing puberty, it's also in charge of your sleep schedule, the very rhythm of your heartbeat, and get this, it influences pretty much every single cell in your entire body. We're talking trillions of them. It is, without a doubt, the master regulator. Okay, so how on earth does it manage all of that? Well, the endocrine system has this amazing partnership between three key players. You've got glands, hormones, and receptors. A great way to think about them is as factories, messengers, and, well, very specific mailing addresses. So first up, the glands. These are basically the hormone factories. And they're not all in one place. They're scattered all over your body. You've got 3 in your brain and another 7 in the rest of your body. And what they do is they literally pull ingredients right out of your bloodstream to cook up these chemical messengers we call hormones. So how does the message actually get delivered? It's pretty cool. A gland produces a hormone and releases it into your bloodstream. Think of it like a massive superhighway. The hormone then travels all through your body looking for its target cell. And it finds it because that cell has a specific mailing address called a receptor. It's a perfect fit, just like a key in a lock. Once it connects, bam, the cell gets the message and its behavior changes. Okay, I know that sounds a little abstract, right? So let's look at some real-world examples to see this system in action. Because by controlling exactly how many hormones get released, the endocrine system can drive these enormous changes all over the body. Let's start with the thyroid. It's this little gland in your neck, and it produces 2 super important hormones. These guys travel to almost every cell in your body with one simple instruction: how fast to use energy. It's basically your body's own internal thermostat. And this is where you really see just how powerful they are. By managing how your cells use energy, these 2 hormones from one little gland control your breathing rate, your heartbeat, your body temperature, and even how you digest your food. That is a ton of responsibility for one small gland. And of course, we can't talk about hormones without talking about the big one, puberty. For guys, the testes start releasing more testosterone, and that's what deepens the voice and makes facial hair grow. For women, estrogen from the ovaries kicks in, signaling the hips to widen and preparing the body for potential menstruation and pregnancy. Now, because puberty is so obvious, it's also led to some pretty big misunderstandings about how hormones work. So let's take a second to bust some of the most common myths and separate the fiction from the facts. All right, here's probably the biggest misconception out there. We always hear about testosterone being the male hormone and estrogen being the female hormone, right? But the reality is, it's just not that simple. Okay, so take a look at this. Yes, men absolutely have much higher levels of testosterone. But the crucial thing to see is that women have it too. It plays important roles in both bodies. The key isn't whether you have it or not, it's all about the balance and how much you have. And it's the exact same story for estrogen, just flipped. Women have much higher levels for sure, but men produce it and absolutely need it. So the bottom line is, both hormones are in both men and women, just in different amounts. That whole idea of exclusively male or exclusively female hormones, totally a myth. This brings us to another big idea, one you hear a lot about, especially when it comes to teenagers. Are we just slaves to our hormones? You know, the idea that we're just puppets and our hormones are pulling all the strings? Is there any truth to that? Well, not really. The research is pretty clear that our behavior is way more complex than that. Sure, hormones are a piece of the puzzle. They can definitely influence brain chemicals that affect our mood, like serotonin. But our own thoughts, our social environment, those things play huge roles too. So do hormones influence us? Absolutely. But do they control us? Nope.
Most of the time, this whole endocrine system does an absolutely masterful job of keeping everything in perfect balance. But what happens when something throws it off? Things like disease, stress, even our diet can disrupt this incredibly delicate system.
A perfect example, and one of the most common hormonal disorders, is diabetes. This happens when the pancreas doesn't produce enough insulin, which is the hormone in charge of managing your blood sugar. Without that crucial messenger doing its job, the whole system gets thrown out of whack. And remember that thyroid we talked about, the body's thermostat? Well, if it produces too little hormone, that's called hypothyroidism. You can feel tired, depressed, and your heart rate might slow down. But if it goes into overdrive and produces too much, hyperthyroidism, you can get weight loss, sleeplessness, and feel really irritable. It's just a perfect example of why balance is absolutely everything.
But honestly, for the vast majority of us, most of the time, this silent, invisible system just works flawlessly in the background. Through its constant, quiet work, it guides our development all the way from infancy to adulthood. And as the source material puts it so well, it drives the changes that ultimately help us become who we are.
So, the next time you feel your heart race, or you feel exhausted after a long day, or maybe you just think about the incredible journey your body has been on, take a second to think about that secret orchestra working inside you. And that leaves us with one last big question. When you really think about it, what part of you isn't shaped by these silent messengers?